Right after I buried my husband of 50 years, my own son thought I was too frail to notice he was trapping me in my house to steal it. He and his wife pretended to care for me, but it was all an elaborate lie to isolate me while they tried to sell my home to pay off a massive secret debt. The disrespect was just staggering. But what my son didn't count on was that my late husband had left me one final secret weapon. I used it to get my justice, and trust me, the ending was perfect. After my John's funeral, the house was full of ghosts and casseroles. I sat in his old armchair, the worn leather of faint comfort, and watched the river of neighbors flow through my living room. They brought salmon bakes and kind words, their faces etched with a genuine sorrow that I appreciated from a distance. My son Andrew was the master of ceremonies for this sad parade. He'd put a hand on a shoulder here, offer a somber nod, there his voice pitched just right. But I saw things others didn't. I saw the frantic muscle twitching in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting to the front door like he was expecting the devil himself to walk in. His wife, Sarah, was his perfect echo, clinging to his arm, her smile as bright and brittle as a Christmas ornament. They looked like people playing a part, and it made a cold knot form in my stomach. In the week that followed, their concern wrapped around me like a heavy velvet blanket. At first, it felt like care, but soon I realized I couldn't breathe. If an old friend called Andrew would gently take the phone from my hand, telling me I needed to rest, he'd pass along the message. Sarah would meet my neighbors at the door with a sad, sweet smile, explaining that I was simply too exhausted for visitors. They were shielding me, they said, protecting my fragile heart. But I've weathered 72 Alaskan winters. I know the difference between a windbreak and a cage. They sorted my mail, paid my bills, and answered my phone slowly and methodically, cutting every thread that connected me to the outside world, all under the guise of love. The betrayal itself wasn't some grand dramatic moment. It was quiet. It was mundane. It happened on a Tuesday at the heavy oak table John had polished every Sunday for 50 years. Andrew laid out a stack of papers, his expression serious and caring. He explained that Dad had left the business affairs in a bit of a tangle, and these papers were just to clean it all up. His voice was so smooth, so reassuring. He guided my hand from one page to the next, his silver pen tapping at the signature lines. He'd murmur about consolidating charter assets, transferring a boat title, just a final formality for the estate. On the last page, his thumb just happened to cover the title of the document. I was so tired. Tired of grieving, tired of the constant pressure of their concern. So I signed. I trusted my only son. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The old house groaned and settled around me. Every creak a memory of John. I finally gave up and padded down the hallway in my thick socks, thinking a cup of tea might help. As I passed the guest room, I heard Andrew's voice. It wasn't the smooth, controlled voice he used with me. This was raw, stripped-down panic, a desperate whisper that sliced through the quiet of the house. He was talking about the engine being shot, about how he couldn't get another loan, not from the bank. There was a long, tense pause, and then his voice cracked with a terror I'd never heard before. He said something about a man named Victor who was going to take the boat. He was pleading for more time, his words tumbling out. And then came the phrase that stopped my heart. He said he just needed until the house sale closed. He insisted it was handled. He told the person on the phone that I had signed it that afternoon. I stood there in the darkness, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. His words echoed in the silent hallway. The house sale closes. She signed it. The velvet blanket of their concern fell away, and I saw the cold steel bars of the cage they had built around me. This wasn't for my protection. It was for my capture. And in that moment, a piece of my heart froze over hard and sharp as glacial ice. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. The next morning, a thick fog rolled in from the inlet, blurring the line between the sea and the sky. It felt fitting. The fog of grief in my own mind was finally burning off, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I sat at the breakfast table playing the part of the quiet, sad mother and watched Andrew and Sarah. They moved with a new kind of energy, a jittery, nervous dance around the kitchen, and they couldn't seem to meet my eyes. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth steady my hands. Then I looked over at Sarah. I made sure my face was a mask of mild, grandmotherly confusion. I asked her in a gentle voice about the sale Andrew had mentioned on the phone last night. I told her I hadn't realized the business had any property to sell and wondered if it was part of the boat charters. You would have thought I'd thrown a snake on the table. Sarah froze a piece of toast, hovering halfway to her mouth. Her eyes flew to Andrew, wide with terror. He shot a look back at her, a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. She stammered something about how it was just business jargon that Andrew sometimes talks in his sleep. Then Andrew jumped in, forcing a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. He patted my hand, telling me it was nothing for me to worry about, that they were just liquidating some old fishing gear and cleaning out a storage unit. He said they were handling everything. His hand on mine was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a manacle. Their stories were flimsy and didn't match, and the panic rolling off them in waves was all the confirmation I needed. That afternoon, I told them the grief had hit me again and that I needed to lie down for a long nap. The relief on their faces was sickening. They were glad to have me out of the way. As soon as I heard the click of my bedroom door, I locked it. From the bottom of my cedar chest, beneath a stack of old quilts, I pulled out my old iPad. It took a moment, but I managed to connect to my neighbor's Wi-Fi, a signal I'd used for years whenever my own was acting up. My fingers felt stiff, but my mind was sharp. I sent a single one-line email to my oldest friend, Maria. Her son, David, was one of the sharpest lawyers in Anchorage. The email was short and to the point. I told her something was wrong with Andrew mentioned the house and told her to have David call me on a specific number at 3 o'clock sharp. The number belonged to a cheap flip phone I'd kept charged in my emergency kit for years. A simple little thing from before smartphones, it was now my only lifeline to the outside world. My little probe had definitely spooked them. That evening, the landline was dead. Andrew announced it with a casual shrug, claiming there was a fault in the line and a repairman couldn't come out until Monday. When I mentioned I wanted to visit a friend and asked for my car keys, he plucked them from the hook by the door and pocketed them with a sad, pitying smile. He told me I was in no state to drive, that he was just concerned for my safety. The house, my sanctuary for 50 years, was now a prison. The air grew thick and suffocating, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was no longer about money or a house. This was about my freedom. I wasn't just being managed, I was being erased. If they wanted a frail, confused, grieving widow, then that's exactly what I would give them. I retreated into the role they had assigned me. I let Sarah fluff my pillows and bring me tea I didn't drink. I listened with a vacant expression as Andrew explained in that slow, patronizing way one speaks to a child how they were handling everything to secure my future. I would nod, offer a weak, grateful smile, and thank them for taking care of their poor old mother. Their relief was so obvious it was almost comical. They relaxed, convinced that my brief spark of curiosity at the breakfast table had been a fluke. They saw my submission as their victory, and it made them arrogant. They believed they had the situation completely under control. While they were basking in their success, I could only imagine the private hell Andrew was living in. I'd lie in bed, my eyes closed, and piece it together, from the fragments I knew. I pictured him down at the docks, staring at the legacy, the boat that had been his father's pride and was now his shame. I could almost see the gleaming new engine he'd gambled everything on, now just a dead weight of useless steel. I imagined his meeting with this Victor, the town's most successful fish processor, a man who operated in the murky waters of off-the-books financing. I knew the type. Victor's smile would have been predatory then. His messages would be terrifying now. I could practically see the text message glowing on his phone screen, a death sentence for his reputation in a town where a man's name is the only true currency. Something like the house or the boat. Your father's name won't save you. You have 2 weeks. The shame of failing John Miller's legacy must have been a physical weight crushing the air from his lungs. He was his father's son, but he was a fraud, and soon the whole world would know it. My long naps became my secret work hours. While they thought I was sleeping, I was in the attic, a dust mask tied around my face, sifting through 50 years of memories stored in old file boxes. It was in John's old military footlocker tucked beneath his dress uniform that I found my arsenal. First, his original notarized will, clear and simple, leaving everything to me, his wife. It was the legal bedrock I needed. But beneath it was something else. A sealed, yellowing envelope. John's familiar, strong handwriting graced the front. It said, "In case of Andrew's folly." My breath caught in my throat. A cold chill ran down my spine, but it was a comfort. Even from the beyond, my husband was still looking out for me. Their confidence made them sloppy. Later that week, Andrew, believing I was safely sedated with chamomile tea and lost in my grief, made a critical mistake. He left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he took a call outside. I was just walking past on my way to get a glass of water when the screen caught my eye. It was an email from a local realtor. The subject line screamed at me in bold black letters, "Aggressive pricing strategy for quick sale. 23 Harbor View Lane," my address. I could see an attachment with photos of my home, my life marketed as a motivated seller of property. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't just planning to sell my home out from under me. He was planning a fire sale. He was gutting it for parts. The 2 days after I saw that email were the longest of my life. I kept my little flip phone clutched in my pocket, a secret talisman waiting for it to vibrate. The call came precisely at 3 o'clock on the second day. David Maria's son had a calm, steady voice that was a balm to my frayed nerves. We spoke for 10 minutes. I told him everything. He told me his plan. The next afternoon, the doorbell chimed. It was a sharp, authoritative sound that cut right through the oppressive quiet of the house. I saw Andrew get up from the couch, his face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. At the door was a tall, clean-cut man in a crisp suit. His expression was pleasant, but firm. He introduced himself as David Chen Maria's son and said he was here to discuss my husband's estate planning. Andrew's body went rigid. He tried to block the doorway, telling David I wasn't seeing visitors, that I was resting. But David's smile just became a fraction colder. He calmly informed my son that this was an official legal matter concerning the last will and testament of John Miller, and that he was legally required to allow him access. He added that if Andrew preferred, he could come back with a state trooper. The choice, he said, was Andrew's. Defeated, my son stepped aside. The living room, my cozy sanctuary, suddenly felt like a courtroom. David laid his briefcase on the coffee table. Sarah hovered nervously in the doorway, wringing her hands. David started by producing a copy of John's original will, the one I'd found in the attic, which clearly named me as the sole beneficiary and executor. Andrew let out a raw, desperate scoff. He insisted the will was outdated, that it didn't matter because he had power of attorney. He even had the gall to say I had signed it myself. David just nodded calmly. He asked if Andrew meant the power of attorney I had signed last week. Then he slid a third paper across the table. He explained that a mobile notary posing as an associate of his mother's had stopped by 2 days ago to have me sign some birthday cards. That document, he said, was a full revocation of power of attorney. It had been signed, witnessed, and filed with the state court that very morning. His final words landed like hammer blows. Andrew's power of attorney was null and void. The color drained from Andrew's face. The carefully constructed walls of his deception crumbled into dust. He started shouting a torrent of justifications and blame, his words tripping over each other in a desperate scramble. Sarah was openly weeping now. Under David's calm, relentless questioning about using an invalid document to list the house about a man named Victor, the entire sordid story erupted from my son. He confessed everything: the secret loan, the broken boat, Victor's threats, the suffocating, crippling shame. He finally collapsed into the armchair, his face in his hands, wailing that he had to do it, that it was the only way, that he was just trying to save his dad's legacy. The confession landed like a bomb. Sarah stared at him, her expression shifting from fear to horror to pure disgust. She was stunned, realizing he hadn't just been desperate. He had been reckless. She couldn't believe he'd lied to her, that he had bet their entire future on a loan shark. Their conspiracy, built on shared secrets, was fractured beyond repair right there in my living room. Through all of this, I had remained silent, watching the son I raised completely unravel. Now I spoke. My voice was calm and clear as a winter morning, cutting through his sobs. I told him he was not saving his father's legacy, he was desecrating it. Then I turned my gaze to David. I asked him to please arrange a meeting with Mr. Victor, the fish processor, and with George, the manager at the local bank. I looked back at Andrew, whose face was streaked with tears and terror. I told him he would be there. He would tell them the truth. And then I said, my eyes locking with his, we would have a family meeting. I was no longer a victim. I was in absolute control. The boss family meeting, I promised, took place not in my warm, familiar home, but in the cold, sterile conference room of the Kenai State Bank. The air was thick with unspoken history, the polished wood of the table reflecting our grim faces. I was there with my lawyer, David. Across from us sat my son, Andrew, a shattered, hollowed-out version of himself, and next to him, his wife, Sarah, pale and silent. At the head of the table was George, the bank manager, a man whose family had known mine for 3 generations, his presence lending a heavy official weight to the proceedings. The final guest arrived last, a man named Victor, the fish processor. He walked in with the easy swagger of a predator, a smirk already playing on his lips, his eyes glinting with a confidence that turned the air in the room sour. I remained silent, a portrait of quiet dignity, and let David orchestrate the beginning of the reckoning. He laid out the facts with the surgical precision of a good lawyer: the fraudulently obtained power of attorney, the illegal listing of my property, the clear and undeniable evidence of elder manipulation. Through it all, Victor listened with that amused smirk, as if this were all just a messy family drama he was enjoying. When David finished, I turned my cool, steady gaze on my son. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room and left no room for refusal. I told him to tell them everything, and with the hollowed-out voice of a defeated man, he did. He confessed it all: his foolish pride, his stupid gamble on the new engine, the catastrophic failure, and the crushing, off-the-books debt he owed to Victor. He didn't spare himself detailing the lies to his wife and the deliberate, cruel deception of his own mother. As he spoke, I watched George the banker slowly shake his head, his disappointment a palpable force in the room. Victor's smirk only widened as he listened, but his victory was short-lived. David calmly picked up a yellowed envelope from the table. It was the one I had found in the attic. He slid it across the polished surface toward the loan shark. He said that before they discussed my options regarding the unofficial loan, he believed this belonged to Victor. It was the envelope marked "In case of Andrew's folly." Victor tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a small, detailed ledger kept in my husband John's meticulous hand. It documented years of Victor's predatory lending practices, complete with names, dates, and exorbitant interest rates. It was a perfect, undeniable roadmap for a federal investigation into loan sharking and tax evasion. Victor's face turned the color of spoiled fish. The swagger evaporated, replaced by raw, naked fear. The true judgment. The one that truly broke my son came not from me, but from George. The bank manager looked at Andrew, his voice filled with a sorrow that was far worse than any anger. He spoke of my husband John, of how he was one of the most honest men he had ever known, how his reputation was built on his word alone. To see his son risk his home, his own mother's safety, all because of his pride. George said it was a deep shame for the whole community. The endgame was swift. Victor, staring at the ruin of his own shady empire, eagerly agreed to a new, fully legal and significantly reduced loan for the boat repairs, all to be managed transparently by the bank. In exchange, the ledger would disappear. Finally, it was my turn to deliver the terms. My voice was steady, my consequences born of justice, not vengeance. I declared that my house was to be placed into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary for the remainder of my life. I looked at my son, his eyes finally meeting mine. I told him he would work to pay off the new loan, every single cent. I explained that he was not disinherited, but that his access to any family assets was frozen until the debt was cleared, and he completed 1 year of financial counseling. I concluded by telling him he would not lose his family, but that he had lost my trust. He would have to earn that back one day at a time. It was not a sentence of ruin, but of responsibility. It was in its own way a lifeline. In a town as small as ours, secrets travel on the wind. The story of what happened in that bank conference room became the quiet talk of the docks and the grocery store aisles. Andrew wasn't openly shunned. That's not the Alaskan way. But he was met with a cool, respectful distance that was a punishment all its own. The easy smiles and backslaps he used to trade on were gone. His currency of reputation, the name his father had built, was spent. He was forced to swallow a lifetime of pride, taking on grueling, low-paying work, crewing for other boats to begin chipping away at the mountain of debt he had built. He still had his boat, but he had lost his standing. Sarah, stripped of all their materialistic ambitions, surprised everyone, including me. She got a job as a receptionist at the local health clinic, and for the first time, I saw in her a strength I didn't know she possessed. Her steady paycheck was a small but vital contribution. They moved into a modest rental on the edge of town, and the life they had pretended to have became a ghost that haunted them. Their alliance, once a bitter conspiracy, was being slowly rebuilt on a foundation of hard, humbling truth. And slowly, Andrew began to change. The financial counseling I'd insisted on cracked open the shell of his pride, forcing him to confront the deep, ugly shame he had tried so desperately to outrun. He started showing up at my house, not with grand, tearful apologies, but with quiet action. He'd mend a loose porch step or salt my walkway before a freeze. His work was a silent, ongoing penance. And me, I thrived. With the oppressive weight of my son's desperation, finally lifted, my house once again became a home. The familiar, comforting scent of salmon smoking in the shed and bread baking in the oven returned. My friends, who had been kept at arm's length by Andrew's cage of concern, flocked back, filling my kitchen with laughter and stories. I was no longer just John's widow. I was Eileen the sourdough, a pillar of the community. My quiet strength, it turned out, was an inspiration. I started using my wisdom, my painful experience to help other older women in town navigate the complexities of wills and trusts, making sure that no one else would be so easily caged. Months passed. One crisp autumn evening, I sat on my front porch, gazing at the snow-dusted peak of the mountain across the bay. The fog that had shrouded our lives for so long had finally lifted. The view was perfectly clear. I saw Andrew walking up the path. His hands were calloused and clean. He held a small, polished wooden music box, one that had belonged to his father and had been broken for as long as I could remember. He placed it gently on the table beside me and wound the key. A tinkling, familiar melody filled the quiet air. He looked at the music box, not at me, and said in a low voice that he had fixed it. I listened to the melody for a moment, a song I thought I'd never hear again. I gave him a small, accepting nod. My words held no grand forgiveness, but something more real, an acknowledgement of a step taken, of a debt being paid in a currency other than money. I just said it was good to have it playing again. He nodded, understanding everything that was left unsaid. Then he turned and walked back down the path toward his own small rented life, leaving me in the peaceful home he had almost destroyed, the home I had found the strength to reclaim all on my own. In the quiet aftermath, the story of the sourdough's will left behind a powerful lesson. It showed that the most painful betrayals often grow from seeds of desperation and fear. Eileen's journey revealed that true justice isn't about simple revenge, but about the unshakable strength required to enforce consequences that are both firm and fair. By understanding her son's weakness without excusing his actions, she reclaimed not just her home, but her dignity, proving that clear boundaries and compassion can and must exist together.